everyone. Welcome to the webinar on time and effort procedures. We're going to take a few minutes just to go over some policies and procedures for time and effort and hopefully clarify some questions that we've had and how we're going to move forward with our time and effort and what the expectations are. So today we're going to talk about the guidelines from the SCDE on requirements for time and effort of federal funds and procedures for our district. So this will apply to all of our federal funds, not just special education or Title I. This process and procedure is going to be used for any federal funds that we have. So today we'll talk about some challenges we've had, the requirements, what a semi-annual certification is, what a PAR is, why we're doing these, why we have to do these, our policy and submission requirements, some reminders, some common questions, and then also provide with some additional resources as well. So let's start first with some challenges that we see with time and effort documentation. So some of the challenges include that a large percentage of our federal funds are used for staffing. And we have sometimes staff turnover, which can make it very difficult. We have some situations where we have decentralized responsibilities. There is sometimes a lack of adequate communication between school programs and our fiscal staff. The complexity of applying the requirements to a variety of situations. Bottom line is people just don't like the time and effort documentation. It can be overwhelming, it can be very confusing. So hopefully this webinar is going to help take away some of that confusion. And of course, there's a basic misunderstanding at times of the basic requirements. So let's talk about some of those requirements. So first of all, you can see the first thing is the state regulation. So there is a regulation from the SCDE in terms of personnel services, and that we are required by the state to keep documentation of any charges to federal grants or awards for salaries and wages and other things that are bought with those federal funds. So our policy is that our semi-annual certification will be submitted via Epicenter every 6 months. So we're going to do them in January and June for employees working 100% of the time in a federal grant program. Our PAR, or Personal Activity Report documents, will need to be submitted monthly, again through Epicenter, and that will happen at the end of every month for employees who are partially working in a federal grant program and then another program. And we'll review this as this goes on, what that will look like. So basically the state is saying that if federal funds are used for salaries, then time distribution records are required. So we must demonstrate if the employee paid with the federal funds and the employee worked on that specific federal program, or sometimes it's called the cost objective. So we have to show the proof that those employees actually worked in those federal programs. So who must participate? Any employee who is working on a federal program. So not contractors. We don't do it for contract folks. It's all employees paid with federal funds and some employees paid with non-federal funds. So the semi-annual certification. This is for an employee whose work is funded 100% by a single cost objective or a federal grant award. It must be completed at least every 6 months, in January and then in June. It must be signed by the employee and the supervisor with direct knowledge of the work being performed. It's an after-the-fact distribution, so it's signed after the work occurs. It is an account for 100% of the employee's activity, and it must be signed within 15 calendar days of the last day of the timeline. So, for example, the first semi-annual goes from July 1st to December 31st. So that must be signed and submitted no later than January 15th. So here's what our semi-annual certification looks like. As you can see, it is going to be submitted through Epicenter, Anything incomplete or incorrect will be rejected. But you can see here it says July to December. So the dates must match the submission dates. Okay, so you're going to put the person's name, and these dates down here must match the dates that occur here. So for example, December 31st, you would have the signature of the employee, the printed name, and this could not be dated prior to December 31st. That date should be 12/31 or after the fact, but no later than January 15th. If you have an individual who has left or resigns or leaves halfway through the year, you could change this date. This is a Word document. It's editable, and it will be in Epicenter. So you can change those dates. You don't have to cross out and write on it. You can go in and actually manipulate the form if you need to. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, your dates must match. The next semi-annual would say from January 1st, 2018 to June 30 or 31st, 2018. Again, signature employee, printed name, and that date would not be until June 30th or after. Don't forget, it also needs the supervisor, printed name, and those dates should be the same. So here is the blank copy of the semi-annual certification that will be in Epicenter. We'll also put it in the operator's notes along with this link for the webinar, and it will be posted as well. So this is an editable document. You can go in and you can change those dates, whatever you need to get it complete. But this must be submitted twice a year for that 6-month period. And it has to be dated no later than 15 days after the last date. So you can see here January 1st to June 30th, so it needs to be signed and dated no later than 15 days after June 30th. And this is for folks who are working 100% of the time in the federal grant program. So for example, IDEA, our special ed coordinators, they are working 100% of the time in special education, and this is the proof that they're doing that. The other type of documentation is called a Personnel Activity Report, or otherwise known as the PAR. This is for an employee when an employee is funded partially on one or more federal grant or cost-objective program. So this has to be completed monthly and coincide with pay periods, so you're going to track the time every 2 weeks. Be supported by records, desk calendars, written records of activity for each day, week. Be signed by the employee and supervisor with direct knowledge of the work being performed. Again, it's an after-the-fact distribution, so it's an after the work has already occurred. You don't fill it out for a previous month. It's done after. It needs to account for 100% of the employee's activity. And again, it must be signed no later than 15 days after the end of the documented month. So an example for the month of December, that ends on 12/31. It needs to be signed no later than January 15th. And these must be submitted monthly through Epicenter. So here is an example of a PAR that we've created. This again is a Word document and will be sent out and posted that you can use. It is editable. You would add your information. Anything that you see here in red is what's going to need to be filled out. So this sample is showing an individual who worked in IDA and in Title I. So you can see we're going to have 1 week schedule. We have the dates, a time schedule, what happened during that time. You don't have to be specific in terms of pulled Sally, Johnny, and Billy. Okay, you just would say resource instruction for students with disabilities. And then if you're doing Title I, you'd say Title I. So however your time is broken down, it needs to show in a schedule. And then you would have your total hours for both programs, staff signature and date, and then your supervisor signature and date. This gets completed monthly. So we're going to need to see 4 weeks of a schedule. And here is the blank form that will be sent and posted. Again, it's a Word document. You can manipulate it. You can add as you will. Just wanted to show you a sample of what one would look like potentially. So this is about time and funding. So why do we do this? Because we have to be supported by a system of controls. which provides a reasonable assurance that the charges are accurate, allowable, and properly allocated. So basically what that means is that we have to make sure that the funds are being allocated appropriately and that the individuals are working in the program like they said they were going to be. It does get incorporated into our records. Anytime we have an audit, this information is always looked at by the State Department. It's to reasonably reflect the total activity for which the employee is compensated. It's not to exceed 100% of the time. It encompasses both federally assisted and all other activities. These two forms comply with the accounting policies and practices. And then it supports the distribution of salary and wages among the various cost objectives in federal grants. It also is to show that anytime there's payroll changes, that it matches the actual distribution of the time recorded. And again, as a federal program and that it's federal monies, we have to have a system to review after the fact changes based on the awards and budget estimates and ensure that the federal funds are being spent as they've been budgeted and as appropriate. And if there are changes, again, it's going to allow us to make those necessary changes and then have it properly allocated and documented. So our policies and submission requirements is that the time and effort policies, we're going to place them on the Google sites, both the federal programs and support services. All submissions must go through Epicenter. So the tasks will be set up through Epicenter for you to submit. Reminders will be sent. Submissions are due by the 20th of each month for PAR. So for example, the December PAR must be submitted by January 20th in Epicenter. For a semi-annual certification, the first submission is by January 20th. The second submission would be by June 20th. Those would be the 2 times a year you would have your staff fill out the semi-annual, and those are the dates that they're due. Any incomplete submissions will be rejected, and you will have to resubmit. So please review and ensure that the information is correct prior to submitting in Epicenter. Some of the common questions we get are really geared towards IDA, since that's a rather large federal fund that federal grant we get. So one of the questions we've gotten is, we have an individual who's serving as a school psychologist and a SPED coordinator. The question was, would they fill out a semi-annual or a PAR? In this case, they actually would fill out a semi-annual because the time is really in special ed, even when you're talking initial evaluations, because there's the thought that the individual student could potentially have a disability. So a school psychologist could be funded through IDA and serve as a psychologist and a SPED coordinator, and it would be a semi-annual. Another question we get is, what about an individual who serves as a special ed coordinator and an RTI coordinator? That actually would require a PAR because RTI is not a special education initiative, it is a general education initiative. So the coordinator must document their time through IDA and then through the general funds. So they would complete a PAR, much like the schedule I showed before, but it would say IDA and then general. So they would put, special education coordinator duties and then RTI coordinator. Another question we get is, what if IDA funds only cover 50% of the special ed teacher or coordinator salary and general funds cover the remainder? So as long as that individual is still working 100% of time in special ed, it would actually be a semi-annual. This documentation is not based on how much of the salary is covered, it's how much time they're spending, right? So if they are spending 100% of their time in special education, even though your IDA budget may not cover all of that, they still fill out a semi-annual because you're supplementing their salary with general funds, but they're still spending all of their time in special education. So some basic reminders, just that the semi-annual certifications are due twice a year in January and June. The PAR documents are due monthly. All signatures are required. Everything must be submitted via Epicenter. The webinars, links to documents, and our policies will be posted on the following sites, and there they are, the federal programs and the support services. site where all this information will be housed. And then here's some contacts. You can contact me, one of the directors of special ed. I'm Laura. You can also contact Susan Howard, our other director of special education, or Tracy Sweet, our director of federal programs. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any one of us. We'll be happy to answer it. Hopefully this is going to make it a little bit clearer on who fills out what and how to submit it. But when in doubt, if you're not sure, please just ask, shoot us an email, give us a call. We're happy to answer any questions and help. So we hope that you all have a great day and that you've learned a little bit. And we look forward to seeing your documentation.